Good morning. This is Bob Gorley with Bob's Truth Seekers. I have the pleasure of talking to Carroll. How do you say your last name?
Teitsworth.
Teitsworth. And he's 81 years young from up around Rochester, New York. So tell us about life growing up in Rochester or wherever you grew up.
Well, my dad was a farmer. His main thing was raising sheep. So I grew up on the farm, went to Geneseo School. To me, the exciting thing was when I got to skip school and stay home and ride the tractor.
How many kids were in your family?
And an older sister, a younger sister, and a younger brother, so 4 of us.
And how big of a high school did you go to?
My graduating class was about 40 students.
And you were the valedictorian?
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Well, great. Okay, so then after high school, you went to Cornell?
Yep.
And how many people go to Cornell?
More than 40.
So that was a big change in pace there.
Yep. Culture shock, but having grown up on a farm, I thought I would. I thought my livelihood would be farming, and so I went to the ag school in Cornell. Going through Cornell, I went into ROTC and ended up then in the Navy. Navy taught me to fly, so my career has been aviation rather than farming. And I found that flying over the guys doing all that work was kind of nice.
When you actually went into the Navy, where did you do your basic training at? Or
Naval aviation is based in Pensacola, Florida. So started there for basic training. An airfield just outside of Florida was another step, and then I went to Corpus Christi for multi-engine training. Then was based in California, the West Coast, operationally.
did you ever get to take off or land on an aircraft carrier?
Yes, that's kind of my point of pride or something. The Air Force guys don't land on carriers. At that time, anybody that went through naval aviation training got to land on a carrier. So I landed a T-28, which was a World War II fighter type plane. It wasn't a jet. It's not a jet. It's a prop plane, but high performance. And so I landed that, carrier qualified on that. And then in multi-engine training, the S-2 is a twin anti-submarine plane. At that time was just used for training. So I carrier qualified in 2 planes. Never operated off a carrier, so I never had that pinnacle of aviation, nighttime foul weather carrier landing, where they say the heartbeat and respiration is higher than it is in combat. I never had that experience, but I do look back and kind of enjoy the memory of that carrier experience. In the Gulf of Mexico, calm waters.
How long is an aircraft carrier?
Something like 1,000 feet, I think.
So you had to land, and was there something out that snagged you, a cable or something?
Yeah, there's the tail hook on the plane, catches, there's 4 wires across the deck. You're aiming for the number 3 wire. I don't remember which wire I caught, but I think it was 6 landings. And then if you're flying a jet, you get catapulted off the deck for takeoff.
Right.
With a prop plane, you have enough acceleration that I never got a cat shot. So you'd land on the angled deck, come to a stop, turn, and take off on the straight deck, and go around and do it again.
So when did you start flying jets?
Never flew jets in a fighter type. What I flew operationally was a P3, which is the civilian version of it is a Lockheed Electra. It's a turboprop, 4-engine turboprop. It was a plane that was used by the airlines when the airlines were transitioning from recip prop planes to jets. So it's capable of about 100 passengers. So first time as I was going into the training for that plane, it's called the RAG. The Replacement Air Group is the training for that model of plane. And the first lesson, other than ground school, the first lesson in the plane was a taxiing lesson. And the guy that was, I and 2 or 3 other guys were training, and the instructor said to us, "Doesn't this feel like sitting on your porch and taxiing your house?" And the other term for that plane compared to a jet, it's bigger, and so maybe it's referred to as the aluminum overcast. But the neat thing about flying the P3 was the main mission of the P3 was anti-submarine warfare. So when you're looking for or searching for or working with a sub, you got to be down low over the water. So the operational altitude for a P3 was 200 feet. And maneuvering, trying to get, dropping sonobuoys into the water and trying to get over the sub, and in actual combat, you'd be trying to drop a depth charge on the submarine. So you're maneuvering. So maneuvering a big plane like that down at 200 feet was pretty unusual. I don't think I realized it at the time how unusual in the world of aviation that would be. But maybe that prepared me for what I did later on.
How many hours of instructions before you get certified in one of those planes?
Oh, I'm not sure. Probably the training command was 2 years of training. And I don't really remember how many hours. A lot of that's ground school and small planes. Well, the small plane in the Navy, what the Navy calls the teeny weeny, is equivalent of a Beach Bonanza, which is a big plane in the civilian single engine world. But I think it was something like 300 hours of training by the time I got to the operational squadron.
How long were you in the Navy altogether?
It was 2 years of training, and then I just did one tour of active duty, so that was another 3 years. So I was in the Navy for 5 years. By the time I had finished that, or was finishing that first tour, our first son was born just as I reached that operational squadron. So 3 years later, Lance was 3 years old, and I'd been home for less than a year. So that convinced me that I didn't want to spend my career in the Navy. Initially, I had been thinking maybe the Navy would be a career, but I didn't like that aspect of family life in the Navy. So I got out and got into small plane aviation instruction, and then got into ballooning as a sideline to that.
Where were you stationed at when you were in the Navy?
Operationally, we were based in Moffett Field in California, the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area.
Okay.
And we deployed to the Western Pacific. So I had 2 deployments, one to Naha, Okinawa, and one to Sangley Point in the Philippines. And from those bases, we would deploy. This was in the Vietnam period, and we would send detachments into Cam Ranh Bay in Vietnam.
When you got out of the Navy, it seemed like a lot of people were starting to treat anybody in the armed forces as not so good. Did you get any bad treatment?
I don't think so.
You weren't exposed.
I was in Cornell when there was, I forget the location, but there was an incident. There was, as I was going through school, the resistance to the Vietnam War was growing, and there was an incident in an Ohio school where the National Guard was competing with students, I think. So there was resistance, and there was some question in the back of our minds as we'd walk across campus in uniform for drills. But I never felt like I was being criticized or complained about.
So how was the transition to civilian life?
It took probably a year to get settled into a job. I did a couple part-time jobs and had some savings saved up from the Navy period. So I think I never was in combat enough to come back with PTSD or something like that. So I think mostly it was just a transition into a different job, and it was about a year after I actually got out of the Navy that I ended up operating at a small airport in a flight school. So that took a year of transition, part-time jobs, and kind of searching for what to do.
So did you start a flight school, or did you start working with somebody that had a flight school, or how did that go?
There was the airport that I ended up being at was owned by the towns of Perry and Warsaw, and that airport came up for lease, and the operator of a nearby airport took the lease on the Perry Warsaw Airport and hired me to be the airport manager. 6 months later, that organization collapsed or went bankrupt or whatever, so I ended up taking the lease on that airport. And my thing at the airport, my background, I'd just gotten out of the Navy, aviation, and what I was interested in was training. So my effort in building the business at the airport was a flight school. And at that time, there were a lot more people getting into small airplanes than there are now. So it was a struggle, but there was a business there, and I kind of cultivated it. Part of the cultivation process was looking for other things to bring in more business, and that's what got me into ballooning. Another guy and I got a balloon and started ballooning as a sideline to the airport.
How many people do you think you taught on that airplanes?
A lot of people started and never finished. So I probably had 20 or 30 logbooks there in the office, people that were, kind of in process. And so through the summer, I was pretty busy, and my friend that was also teaching, we were pretty busy. During the winter, things would die down, but I don't actually have a number. I know one year I recommended 10 or 11 students for their flight tests. So that may have been representative of 5 years I was there. I might have graduated 40 or 50 students.
And they soloed? You got them to solo?
Well, solo is the first step.
Okay.
But I'm talking about recommending for flight tests. Okay. So actually getting their license.
When they soloed, did you cut the shirts off and sign them on the bike?
We didn't go too far that way. We would, if they were wearing a tie, we'd cut off their tie. Okay. But we didn't want to be mean about that.
Were you ever involved in a plane crash?
The closest I came to was it was wintertime, and a fellow who had his license wanted to get checked out in a plane that we had for rent, and there were little drifts of snow drifting across the runway, and as we took off, the left main mount of the plane went through one of those, tried to go through one of those. It wasn't a very big drift, but it was enough to pull us to the side, and nose wheel collapsed, prop hit the ground, came to a stop, and there was enough damage to be expensive to fix, but it was damage that was not considered an accident by the FAA.
Non-life-threatening.
Not at all life-threatening. Highly embarrassing, and we had to close the runway overnight until we could get somebody to come and tow the airplane off the runway. But that was the closest I came to an accident.
How did you transition to hot air balloons? Walk us through that process.
As I was looking for other ways to bring in business to the airport, the guy who was flying with me, said to me, "Well, what about balloons?" And I said, "What do you mean, balloons?"
And what year is this?
This would have been about 1974 to 1975. So
you're still young.
I had been at the airport for maybe a year. It was probably my second winter going through the airport, second year going through the winter at the airport. And So Watson said, what about balloons? And I had never heard of such a thing as hot air balloons. So he described hot air balloons. You make the air hot and it goes up and you drift with the wind and you land. And I had been thinking that the other thing that we should cultivate at the airport was a charter service where we would fly people to New York City for the weekend or whatever. And I thought to myself, that's never going to fly somebody to New York for the weekend. But he said that there were people, he knew of 4 different either couples or families that wanted to learn to fly balloons. So my attitude was, well, we're in the business of teaching people to fly, so if that would generate more students, then we should do it. And so he and I and another friend there from the airport, there was a fellow in Batavia that was part of the Balloon Federation of America. He had a newsletter that had ads for used balloons. So the 3 of us got together and we sent a check to a fellow in Texas, and he sent his used balloon to us. And now I know that that's not the way to buy a used balloon, but that balloon arrived in perfect condition. So we had a balloon. My friend Watson worked through that summer to get his license, and as you guys are finding out, it takes more time to get the right weather, get a crew together, get a flight off, get enough flights to get a license. The training process takes a while. So Watson spent that summer getting his license. By the next winter, I had learned of a guy in the Poughkeepsie area who had a VA-approved flight school. And I had VA benefits. So I used my VA benefits, went to the guy in Poughkeepsie, got some basic training, came back home and did the rest of my training that summer. And by, I think it was November of '76, I got my check ride and got my commercial rating, started offering balloon flight training, promotions, sales, etc.
How many people do you think you've taught ballooning?
I eventually became a balloon examiner, meaning that I gave the flight tests, and so I've issued, I think it's 110 pilot certificates. They're not all students that I trained, but I probably have trained 30 or 40 or 50. And some people start and never finish, but
Out of
something
those
like that.
110 that became pilots, how many went on and became commercial pilots? Ballpark.
Some of those 110 were
Commercial pilots.
commercial pilots, but there's two different. There's a distinction. You can hold a commercial pilot certificate and never depend on ballooning for your income, right? So, depending on what the term commercial balloonist means, one thing I noticed was my whole attitude towards flying, whatever flying I was doing, was that was my means of making a living. So I was the greedy, hungry commercial pilot. A lot of the people that I trained, or at least a certain number of people I trained, since I was into selling rides and doing training, they would get their certificate and start doing that. And then they would find out how often you have to cancel flights and refund the people's money or whatever the disappointment and so on. So I don't know how many, but a number of people got their certificate, started offering commercial services, and then backed away from that and said, no, I can make my money at my regular job and ballooning will be my recreation. And to me, it was interesting to see that some of those students picked up my commercial attitude, and it ended up not appealing to them. I saw the same thing in the airplane world too. A guy starts training. I'm thinking of a particular guy. He said, I want to get my license so that I can fly my kids to college and go visit them on vacations or whatever like that. And then you find out that, well, to fly my kid to the college in the Midwest, I need a bigger airplane, and I need instrumentation. I need an instrument rating, and I need, and it just goes on and on. So if the real thing that motivated your heart, even if you didn't realize it, was the fun of flying or just the ego of it or whatever it is, sometimes the idea of making money with it or traveling with it, if you want to travel with your own airplane, there was a phrase around the airport, if you got time to spare, go by air, because you're probably going to get stuck someplace along the way with weather or something like that. So anyway, people's attitudes vary.
And then you got your family involved in hot air ballooning.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. When I first started, my kids were in, like, my daughter was in kindergarten, son was in probably second grade, and then two younger ones. So as I was getting into that world of ballooning, the kids were going through elementary school and then high school. And elementary kids, you give them a chance to help, and they probably want to do it, right? It's a good thing for them, and it's rewarding to parents to see them joining in. When they get to be teenagers, then they may start to wonder whether it's cool to be too involved with mom and dad's business, right? And so they may kind of back off, and they may not be as good crew when they're 16 as when they're 10. But then they go through college, and they find out that ballooning is a pretty good conversation starter. So I think each of our kids, in their own way, went through a period. What is it the Amish call the period where the kid goes out into the world and eventually he comes back. And for us, all four of our kids, in one way or another, got back into flying. Three of them became pilots and run their own business. The fourth is not interested in flying, but she's really good at running our office and managing our business. So that's actually the most rewarding thing to me, is to see those kids growing up, participating in, and now they're taking over the business and they're doing things. Obviously all of us at our age see the kids and grandkids doing techie things that we would never even dream of. So that's a big part of it. But even the things that I did when I was younger, they probably can do now better than what I did. And that's rewarding to see.
That's what you want them to get better than you.
Yeah. And I've thought that's something that an instructor probably ought to be able to do is, if you're a decent instructor, you can probably teach somebody, whatever discipline it is, you probably can teach somebody to be better at it than you were, because they have different skills and abilities.
What's some of your favorite moments from your hot air ballooning?
Most any flight has some, I'll back up. In the airplane world, airplane flying can be defined as hours and hours of boredom punctuated by moments of stark terror. Ballooning is not that way. Almost any flight, any balloon flight, has some element of adrenaline in it. You know, am I going to be able to make that field, or is the wind going to shift? And if I get there, oh no, there's cattle under those trees. I better not land there. So almost any balloon flight has some excitement to it. Some more than others, and sometimes more than it should have. But maybe this is an example. For a lot of years, people would ask me, what's your most exciting experience? And I would feel disappointed that I didn't have something to tell them. But then one day I launched from the Batavia airport with a student, and my wife's sister's boyfriend at the time was with us, just riding along. Downwind of the Batavia airport is a huge complex. It's a community college with acres and acres and acres of open grass yard around it. And on that yard, as we approached it, I noticed there was some small airplanes on that yard. And as we approached the school, this little airplane took off and it climbed up towards us. And we could look down on it at first, and then it was flying around us. And my now brother-in-law said, wouldn't that thing do a number on us if it hit us? And I said, no, don't worry about it. He's more scared of us than we are of him. And pretty soon the little plane's above us, and we could hear it, but we couldn't see it. And he made another comment to that effect. And again, I said, oh, don't worry about it. And then bzzz, thunk. And that little airplane hit the top of our balloon. And we could hear the prop come off and bounce around the inside of the balloon. The wings caught the fabric of the balloon and stopped it, so the whole airplane didn't come into the balloon. But the airplane then fell off the side of the balloon and down to the ground. And the radio-controlled operator walked over to examine his destroyed little radio-controlled airplane. So if I tell that right, then you think that it was a real airplane, and it wasn't. But it still left a rip, probably 4 or 5 feet wide, in the top of the balloon. And so I wondered at that point, will the balloon survive that? We could look up and we could see the torn fabric flapping where air was escaping. So I thought, well, now would be a good time to land, maybe. But right ahead of us was a road with power lines on it, and beyond that was woods. So it was 20 minutes later before we landed, and during that 20 minutes, I learned something pretty interesting. And that was that those burners can put so much heat into the balloon that even if a little bit is escaping up there at the top, the balloon still flies okay. And actually, later on, I learned that the balloon is designed that way. The guys that designed and built the balloon, they build the nylon webbing load tapes at a distance such that if that fabric rips from load tape to load tape, the balloon will still fly okay. So the lesson was that a balloon can engage in aerial combat with an airplane and win.
So it's like ripstop nylon. They're made out of ripstop nylon,
Yeah.
the material.
The fabric itself is strong,
Yeah.
but those nylon webbing, it's kind of like a small seatbelt webbing that forms the structure of the plane, of the balloon.
So back in the Navy, did you fly a jet or not? You did not fly a jet.
Nope, not a.
What altitude would you go in the airplane?
The plane that I carrier qualified in was a turbocharged reciprocating engine, 1,400 horsepower, and we did a couple of flights with that turbocharger. We got to 14,000.
14,000.
To get above 14,000, you're supposed to have oxygen, and we didn't. I don't know if the plane had it, but we didn't use it. But the same thing is true in a balloon. Not supposed to go above 14,000 unless you have oxygen. Supplemental
That's
oxygen.
above sea level.
Right.
What's the highest you ever had a balloon?
14. The
So you
highest
had
I'll
one
admit
for
to is
14,000.
14,000.
Okay. What's one of your memorable flights besides that getting hit by that little airplane?
Well, another one would be one was there came a time, I think this was in maybe the mid 80s, when there's a national club of balloonists called the Balloon Federation of America. And the BFA initiated a kind of competition thing. They called it the long jump contest. And the idea was see how far you can go. And they set up criteria for a certain size balloon. You could have so much fuel and get in the air and see how far you can go. And the first year they did that, another guy and I decided we would try that contest. We took off from the north end of Conesus Lake, which is almost straight south of Rochester, New York. We didn't really have a very clear plan in mind, but the reason we flew that day, it was a December 27th, so we had hot chocolate and Christmas cookies with us for sustenance. And we took off. The wind that day on the surface was calm, so we could get off the ground. Wasn't too much snow on the ground. And the winds aloft were forecast to be strong. So, well, maybe this is the day that we can get a good distance flight. We took off and we're climbing, and through almost 5,000 feet, it felt like we weren't hardly moving. But once we got up above 5,000 feet, he was in his balloon, I was in mine, and whichever one of us was higher was pulling away from the other. So obviously the higher we went, the more wind we had. So we kept on climbing. And at around 10,000 feet, we thought, well, is this high enough? But it was obvious if we could go higher, we'd go faster. And so we kept climbing, got to 12,500, and the rule says that if you go above 12,500 for over 30 minutes, you're supposed to have oxygen, supplemental oxygen equipment. We didn't have that oxygen equipment, but thinking about this kind of happened as we were flying. Thinking about that rule, that meant we could go above 12.5 as long as we didn't stay for longer than 30 minutes. So we went on up to 14,000, and it's hard to say exactly at 14,000, so that's why I say 14 is the highest I'll admit to. It may have been 14.2 or something like that. But after half an hour, we came back down and got a whiff of that nice dense air down there at 12.5 and went back up again to 14. And during that period, we're crossing the Finger Lakes, and I looked down, and I can't remember which lake it was. It had to be either Seneca Lake or Cayuga Lake. But wherever it was we were crossing it, I had a map, and I could measure on the map that this lake is 2 miles wide. And looking down, you can tell pretty precisely when you pass over the shoreline of the lake. So I noted the time, and then when we passed over in the Navy you call that feet wet. And when I went feet dry, it was 2 minutes later. And that lake was 2 miles wide. So from up there, we're crossing the middle of the Finger Lakes. Up there to the north, about 20 miles or so, is the New York State Thruway. And we could tell we're pretty well staying even with the eastbound traffic on the Thruway. Not exactly, but pretty close. So we were doing about 60 miles an hour, but it felt perfectly calm.
How long was the flight altogether?
About an hour and a half.
And how far do you think you went?
111 miles.
111 miles.
And we were 7th in the country that year.
And how cold was it?
It was single digits on the ground, and I never thought to check the temperature at altitude. But it must have been a good 20 below. So we had known it would be cold. We had dressed with layers and layers and layers, woolen sweaters. And any wintertime flight is going to feel cold because you're standing still in the basket. It's like sitting in a tree stand in the winter. So I had done enough wintertime flying that I knew dress, the long johns, the couple pair of jeans, lots of sweaters, and then cover it all up with a snowmobile suit, and you'll probably be fairly comfortable. So in the basket, had another guy with me. If you want to get as far as you can get, then you don't want extra weight in the basket, because extra weight means you use more fuel. But on the other hand, it's winter. And out there looking east across New York State, there are areas of woods. So what happens if I run out of fuel over woods and I land in the woods and I break a leg or an arm or something like that? We concluded that it would be safer and we would sacrifice whatever fuel we needed to take somebody with us. So Sean had somebody and I had somebody, and so there's two of us in the basket. Not much room to do jumping jacks, but we could do knee bends, and during the flight we were pretty comfortable. You're aware that it's cold, but you're not uncomfortable. But the interesting thing was, we get downwind, and we made up our mind ahead of time, we're going to go until we've got, I think the number we decided was 20% fuel in each of two tanks. So we got to 20% and just stopped burning, which means now the balloon's gradually going to cool and you start to descend. And it cools more and you descend faster. And it's called a terminal velocity descent. And terminal velocity descent does not mean that you die at the end of it. It means the balloon is descending as fast as it's going to descend. And it's about 600 feet a minute. And what's happening is the balloon is acting like a parachute. But that at 600 feet a minute, it was amazing how cold that felt, because that gave us a little bit of wind chill. And
the whole balloon's cold, so it takes a lot of heat it back up to land.
Yeah, you need heat at the bottom to level off. The interesting thing was, we got down, now we're 100 miles away from where we started. Wind was calm where we started. We were lucky that it was still calm where we came down. And in fact, we came down and we backed up a little bit to land in somebody's yard. And then packing up the balloon got us warmed back up again.
111 miles is good for 7th in the country. What won it that year? You ever hear?
I'm not sure, but I know since then guys go 400 or 500 miles. They
Yeah, but
do.
I mean, 100, yeah, that was pretty good. What keeps you motivated for ballooning and stuff like that?
My main motivation is making a living, and for most of my life, it has been buying groceries for my family. Now, my wife and I are on Social Security, and we could live on that. But now my motivation is to help our kids. There's 3 kids involved in the business, and there's a big difference trying to make a business support one family to support 3.5 families. So we keep pushing to build the business, and that's part of the fun process of watching the kids. They are so tuned in to customer service and developing things like our booking program on the web, and the things that they can do that I would never have been able to do. It's pretty neat.
We're advertising while we're talking here. And would you recommend youth going into the military?
People's personalities vary, and I met people in the military. You see any job where people are not suited to that job, so I wouldn't say that it's a blanket thing. But if you can pass the medical, and you can work with the military lifestyle, for sure, there's no place else that you get the kind of training that you get in naval aviation. That's I highly recommend that. I think I'm wearing a Blue Angels hat, right?
Yes.
I never flew for the Blue Angels, but the point of the Blue Angels is that any naval aviator does the same basic maneuvers, not with 18 inches of clearance, but any naval aviator does the things that the Blue Angels do, and I'm sure the same thing is true for the Thunderbirds. So, if you're interested in aviation, there's no place that gives you the training that the military does.
What's the favorite aircraft that you've ever flown?
I guess whichever one I'm flying today.
Okay.
Different purposes.
It kind of sounded like that one you landed on the aircraft carrier, but
if I had
if you only
the
had one
means
flight
to
left.
buy a toy,
Okay.
if I had, then it might be that T-28. Because looking back, when you're going through military flight training, every flight is a check ride. You have to do whatever is laid out for that flight, or you get a down. And if you get a down and you go back and do that flight, 2 downs within the certain stretch of the training command, and you're out. So it's as opposed to civilian training. As a civilian instructor, I'm supposed to make things easy and go well for my students. Military instructors, the reputation of the screamer military instructor is overdone. There's lots of really good instructors in the military, but it's more regimented. And so, looking back on the time that I was flying that T-28, I feel like looking back, I never got to be comfortable and enjoy it. And I would love to do that again when I know what I know now and could relax and feel like I was doing it better.
Well, Carroll, thank you for sharing with Bob's Truth Seekers. Is there any final things you want to pass on? This is supposed to be helpful for the youth.
I would say the thing that was most rewarding is having my kids join with me in the business. But then I would also say that the thing that I most want to say about career and life is, I've said this in ground schools, when you're meeting a landowner, meeting people during flight, the attitude of gratitude is really important. This morning we landed and laid our balloon over some corn. So when the farmer shows up, we want to apologize and offer him that we'll pay for the damage. But the fact that we say, thank you for letting us land, for having a field here, that attitude of gratitude. Well, my gratitude is to God. He's the one that orchestrated all those decisions that I look back on now, that led me to the experiences that I've had and the family and all that. So thank you, God.
How's your wife survived all this?
She says that I'm the risk taker, and I taught her to solo an airplane. She says she doesn't want to fly a balloon because she doesn't know where she's going to land. I say, well, there's landing spots out there all over the place. But we've learned, I think she would agree with me, that lots of people say that aviation, pilots, motorcycle drivers, horse people, race car drivers, all those people are risk takers.
Yeah.
But everybody takes risks in some way or other. My wife is a nurse, and she'll take risks with health. She'll also be real careful, and she has been careful about diet for our whole life. So we can get to 80 years old and still be healthy. But everybody takes risks. The question is, are the benefits of whatever you're doing worth the risk? So analyze risks carefully.
Well, she's done very well with you because you seem very healthy. Once again, thank everybody for listening to this. If you like Bob's Truth Seekers, please like and subscribe. And if there's any comments or anybody else that you think I should be interviewing, please let me know. Thank you very much. And today is June 23rd.
Probably.
Have a good day.
Thanks, Bob.
See ya.